So I will really focusing on the question about methods, methodology, and in migration, in the field of migration research. If I'm just picking up some notions that are really clear, of course I could go faster, but I think some notions are, I think, very relevant, especially they come from my background is coming from a qualitative research practice. So I think in qualitative research, we are very well trained to question notions that we are using, especially in the migration context. So I will focus a little bit on that. So my first question will be like, how can a border crossing phenomena like migration and mobility be studied? Of course, this question is not new, but I think we should take into account what is the current research, migration research, critical migration research also offering as methods. And how can social inequalities be addressed? This question I will focus a little bit less, but it's still important, and I can also focusing more on this question in the discussion. So I will show my whole framework, research framework on the basis on a qualitative research design I used for research about transnational families. So I will give at the end, I will give some insights also in this research. So now I have to, yes, it's functioning, yes. So the first step, I think always when we talk about migration and mobility, we have to think about which framework we are using, we are applying. So the nation state is often used as an unquestioned analytical framework. And I think this is the first step that we should go over. And because migration is a phenomenon that is crossing borders, so we should also adapt the methodology to include and to go beyond the nation state borders. So the nation state as an analytical framework should be overcome. And it should be overcoming that naturalization of the nation state as a natural unit for comparative students. We should go beyond. It should not be, this is a critique on the methodological nationalism, to equate society with the nation state, because it is not. It is just a political entity. And conflate national interests with the purpose of social sciences. So they should very be attentive and aware of this. Implications, and of course also of the own identification and the indication maybe of the university or the place we are working about nation states. So the concept we can use instead and to overcome methodological nationalism is the concept of transnationalism I'm proposing. This is from Priest, but I have also other references to say that refers to social relations and groups that extend across the borders of the nation state. So it goes beyond the nation state. These are social event phenomena as migration is and mobility is, and processes that extend across the borders of nations and nation state. For example, transnational families, transnational organization, transnational labor markets, and also, of course, social actors. And this plurilocal, this term is from Priest. He likes this term of that transnationalism means that it's spanned plurilocally across nation state. That means the nation, the locality is still very relevant. It's the transnationalism approach, not saying that the nation state is not relevant anymore. This is also the differences to other concepts like globalization, cosmopolitization, or others. But it says that the nation state and the locality are still is very important, but it should not be the border, the analytical border of research. This is very important. So the transnational approach rejects the nation state as a sole starting point of empirical analysis. It focuses more on practices, and these practices can also be across a nation borders. But also it goes beyond to say also that we have to denaturalization also categories such as nation or space, but also, and you will see it, I will also explain about other categories like, for example, gender, race, and class. We should go beyond and also have a critical lens on the use of these terms. And another term I'm adding here, it comes not from the transnational approach, but from the post-colonial approach, and I think it's very relevant to think also about it, is about entangled histories. So of course, what is happening in one specific place is entangled is interlinked, interwoven in the history of another place. So especially in migration, the field of migration, the migration policy, for example, I'm based in Switzerland and was studying families from former Yugoslavia are very interlinked because both had the interests of sending just labor migrants and not integrating them and not having families. And this was the interest of Switzerland. They needed labor force and also the interest of former Yugoslavia because they wanted just to export that workers go abroad and come back with new work methods to build up Yugoslavia that was at this time a socialist country and Switzerland not. So it was also every history is entangled, especially also regarding colonialism. So what we do is that to overcome this methodological nationalism and to develop, as Amalina and Faith says, to develop a transnational methodology. So how we can do that? So I will give you just some things you can think about. When we have this lens of transnationalism in mind, we have to question those notions as, for example, the family. So the family especially was also often like created as a unit based on one locality with father, mother, and maybe 2, 3, or 4, I don't know with how many children, but this family unit was also often used also as a very natural category, but it has to be questioned because family can live transnationally and they can still build a unit when they are not living on the same place. The same is for ethnicity. When we think about ethnicity, especially in Europe, we use often this term ethnicity, also sometimes instead of race. That also we have to question what is ethnicity. So what is do we need instead of talking about to overcome the nation state as a natural unit, then we use instead of the Albanians or the Nigerians or the whatever as an entity. And this is also a kind of thinking that we should overcome and thinking more about what kind of categories are really relevant, and these are categories that are built and not natural. The same is for generation. When we talk about the integration process of the first or the second or the third generation, we have to question which meaning we have in mind. So is it to belong in the family generation, then the first or the second or the third generation? Is it also very important to belong to a specific historical generation? But it means a very different thing to be a second generation in the 60s and the 70s or today. So also these often used terms we found in research, we have really to question what we mean by that. Especially when it comes to intergenerational processes, that was my research on, that have been often created or thought about like this kind of assimilation process over generation. And in this lens, it was like people having different or more than one belonging on more than one identity were like considered as a lack of integration. But now we know today that you can have plural identities, you can have transnational networks, crossing border networks, and you can, in the same time, can be integrated in one place, but you can also be integrated in more than one place. So this is like things I think we have to consider if we talk about and develop a research question, and also what kind of methods then we can use. So this was just one example to give this very maybe a theoretical, to give a like more an example. For example, the family unit, as I said, that is often very used also linked to a very, especially in Europe, with virtuous, especially approach that can be questioned also from a gender perspective, from a race perspective, but also instead of that, we can overcome it and to look family as more a process of formation, how family are built. And they are maybe not built by just some being relative, but they are maybe built by other practices. So Morgan is also focusing really on these practices that are building family, especially also on the topic of transnational care. This is a very relevant topic today, and this kind of transnational families. So that we have to look what is coming together, what is what are the links, what are the practices behind. So which methods then we can use to fit in this methodological new frames? So I was sitting like three. I think they are very famous maybe, but they are very suited also to research in taking into account this kind of transnational perspective. So the first one is multi-sided ethnography. That's not new, that's a very old one, but I think it's still very relevant, especially in the globalized world. The second, I will also explain a little bit more, maybe it's not that well known, about the biographical analysis. And the third one, I will not explore more, but I think is also could be also very relevant, is a social network analysis. So this like the three, I think they are very nice, interesting methods you can use. And I will just talk about the first two. So the multi-sided ethnography is nothing very new. It was for Marcus in 1986 and Clifford. So it was like a research method that is also spanning about numerous localities. So say Marcus was thinking that just this traditional ethnography on one place, being a long time on one place, is just not very adapted to study phenomena like in a globalized world. So it's not just one method, it's a combination of various methods of data collection, like also not just observation, but also structured and unstructured interviewing, participant and non-participant observation. So it's very linked to ethnography. What is very interesting about it, like this is for, I think, very easy to keep in mind concepts that like is following the people. So following people when they are moving, especially in the topic of mobility and migration. So you can do ethnography if you follow the people where they are going and different, and they are like faced to different realities, following the thing. So sometimes there are not just the people very important about migration, but maybe more things that are traveling around, creating the connection between different people. So you can following the thing, or the money, for example, where migrants are the remittances, you can follow the remittances, following the thing, or you can follow, yes, or strategically situated ethnography to say, okay, there are like places, and in my research, I found it very interesting to be at airports. For me, it was like being in the airplane between Switzerland and Kosovo. It was like, this was the place people, what I would like to make an interview are there, because there are those who are really traveling between these two countries. And this is what was interesting for my sampling about questioning about transnational ties between Kosovo and Switzerland. It would be in the airplane. So I was thinking for next research, why not just making interviews or participant observation at the airports or in airplanes? So these are where the people are traveling. So at the airports, it would be also interesting to interview those who cannot move. So in migration, it's also always also the question, who can move and who cannot, and what is happening between them. So, and also, of course, follow the plot or the life. You can also have, without, if you cannot be a possibility of follow the people, you can get and their experiences of having traveled or having changed the location by asking them about their life course or biography. And this is the second method I would like to explain a little bit. And I think this is very interesting in the field of migration to do a biographical analysis, because you can, even if there are, for example, people living in Switzerland, by asking them about their life course, you can have information about how it was on their childhood. And you cannot just, they are not like limited on the period of time they are migrants in Switzerland, but you can cap them as maybe professors coming from a different place, and maybe they are not just asylum seekers in Switzerland. So you can have like the trajectories, the life course, and of course the biographic analysis was developed through different disciplines. It offers a way of empirical capturing the diversity, complexity, and transformational character of migration, in taking into account the whole life stories. And I will explain a little bit more also about the data collection. And of course, it comes with very old concept or method, like coming from William Isaac Thomas and Florence Saniecki, the Polish peasant in Europe and America. You can read about it. It was very interesting because like pioneers this time in the 1980s to have, they were starting with postcards coming from the Polish peasants, so and collecting this data about their life course. That was like the first study we can talk about using a biographical method in migration. So the data collection is often used, especially in the German, German approach I'm using is from Schütze from 1983. So, and this is very interesting because you have not a real question. So often my students in my classes are asking, what kind of questions can I ask? And I say, when you are doing biographical analysis, you have just one question. You ask the people to explain and to talk about their lives. So this is very interesting then as an approach, that because you have really the researcher has not a lot of, is really listening to the other. So the other has like story to tell, the experience to tell, and the expert, like the researcher, has really to try to understand what the other is living. And this, I think, is very important. Of course, you have also to reflect about bias, about gender bias, about race bias, about the context, because it needs like a relation of some of trust and of confidence that you can ask somebody about their life. If you have just 30 minutes time, the better don't do that. So you need like a good interview about the biographical interview needs like 1 to 2 hours at least. So, and also a place. And I often say that you should ask the person you want to have an interview, ask them where she wants to have the interview. So in a place she feels comfortable. Of course, for ethnographer, it's always very interesting to be at their home, but not everybody would like that. So it's also interesting then to give the person the possibility to ask where you want to have the interview, and then to go there, because the place she will choose has also an importance. For the analysis, it's just shortly to have in the framework of the research. So I'm using the hermeneutic biographical case reconstruction and following Rosenthal, but there are others, phenomenological narration. So it's just, for the analysis, then it's more also techniques, and maybe you just follow some workshops. I cannot explain it further. But what is very important, and this is then also important because that's why I come in with the research question after, is that if we take about on a biographical analysis, we have also different kind of research questions. So we go in the logic of discovery. We go in the logic that the expert of the experiences is the person I want to have an interview with them, and not my analytical questions and not my theories. I have to forget them in the moment. So it's more about to give insights and to understand what is happening. So this is also used by the framework from the grounded theory, that we have to discover, and we'll develop theory by doing analysis. So using this contrastive comparison, that means that, for example, if you have a case where, I don't know, a case where the time as a child was very important, maybe you ask somebody who was the migration time was afterwards or forwards. So you have like to identify then some criteria you can contrast. Not just male and female, but maybe more about also more context, more life courses. So more, it's not just about categories you compare, but it's about phenomena you compare. So it's about, they're saying you can just say what's the next case you will analyze, or also you will data collect when you have finished the first analysis. So, and you, of course, you go on, and this is maybe also the problem sometimes. So we have to think about time, to think about when you have to do a biographic analysis, you can have not a lot of cases, because you have a really in-depth analysis that is using time, especially you have to find donors or how to finance your studies. But it can be really relevant to have like also in mixed methods, if you have like a bigger sampling, to say, yeah, now we found out by the statistics that this and this person are more concerned about this phenomena, or and then you want to explore it more, and then you do in-depth interview, biographical interviews with some of them. So I come to the point that what kind of research questions then you can use. So of course, if you maybe you heard last time, I don't know, about qualitative methods. So you'd often have not as in quantitative approaches like a hypothesis that you are like to answer with yes or no or with white facts. So you have more open research question that you're going to explore. And by the steps of the analysis, you have more and more, the question can be more and more focused. So it's more to understand the phenomena that maybe is new or is difficult to explain, to discover strategies of people, because the people are really in the persons are in the focus. It's not about just and I think this is also the strength that to say that how they deal with this, how they do to come, or how do they overcome exclusion, or what kind of strategies are they developing in the framework of nation state, of migration policies, of restrictions often, but people are more clever and have their strategies to deal with. So also to take a life course perspective, because we know that things are changing through life. If you are 20 or if you're 40 or 60, we have also now the migration at older age, the pension migration. We have of course, there are different impacts if you are a small child or later on, or maybe also different things were happening through your life. Maybe you had also different status. So this is very interesting, I think, for to have these open research questions. Also to give a voice to the people concerned and the changing meaning of the importance in life. And of course, I was in my research, I was making a combination of following people and a biographical approach. So some of my people I interviewed, I did 2 interviews. Once they were living in Switzerland, and additional then 1 interview also when they moved in other country. So this is my publication in German, but I have also linked an article I was written in English about relevance of social inequalities for family formation in a transnational migration context. And I would give you now just a few examples about how what I explain now theoretically, how you can put this in practice. So I had 3 research questions. These were my final research questions. To what extent are experiences of difference in a family passed on intergenerationally in the transnational migration process? How are transnational migration experiences transmitted across generations? And what is the significance of multiple social inequalities in this sense of social cultural border drawing process? So of course, these are really complicated questions. And these questions I had at the end of my research project and not at the beginning. I was starting with the question about the second question about how are transnational migration experiences transmitted across generations. And about the other aspects, I was coming through my analysis. So you can you can start with having a more or less open question and then go and having it more deepen. So I'm working on another research project about the second generation of people being placed in institutions. And also then we started with a very open question about how intergenerationally this experience was passed of displacement from one generation to another. And then we discovered different topics about being a single mother, or and then we went more deep in the questions. So as to give an example, what I mean with the biographical approach, it was just one boy, or let's say one man of my sampling. He was born 1981 in former Yugoslavia. So I changed the color. He migrated with at the age of 5 with the family to Switzerland. So, and then in Switzerland, he went to school, and secondary school, I mean, this we have in Switzerland sometimes 2 level, and this was the higher level, but he had needed 2 attempts to go in the higher level. So he had this, it means that he had some difficulties in school. He ended secondary school at the age of 18, and this is really late for Switzerland. For our school system, this is very late. Normally you finish at 15 or 16. So he had been doubled at least twice. And then in Switzerland, he started directly working without any qualification. This is very not usually. So especially if you have finished secondary school, normally you do have like a kind of, we have our professional system, normally you get a qualification. So it was like, we can see just from this data, we can see that there was some troubles, of course. So, and I'm just taking the biographical data without the context, but of course I have them from the context of having done an interview with him. And what this was very interesting, because at the age of 18, his parents moved, left Switzerland, and they moved to Kosovo. So he was then at 18, he was also alone. And maybe we can also now see here family expectations, as he was he was working. So he started working. Maybe he had also to live on his own because his parents were moving, were leaving him. He was alone with his sisters, but nobody. He needed an income. But this comes afterwards, 7 years afterwards. He was then working in an enterprise, and he had the possibility even to get a better qualification. And then at this time, he quit the job. And he says, this was my party time. It was my free time. I really loved it. On the same time, if we look, he was just without any job. So he was like, then had some different attempts to find again a job in Switzerland. When he got 1 year later, he got married in Kosovo. So his wife he married in Kosovo, but still lived here. And then comes what I mean with transnationalism doesn't mean that the migration state, that the nation state is not relevant anymore. He could not, without having a job in Switzerland, he could not let his wife come to Switzerland. So she had to stay. So in this time, he was explaining that he has really this time of moving forward and going back, and between Kosovo and Switzerland. His wife couldn't come because of migration law, and he didn't want to stay there. So he was really in between. He was trying to find a job to come her in, but he didn't realize. So again, 3 years later, so it was quite 4 years that he was moving and looking for a job in Switzerland. And there, his wife got pregnant in Kosovo. And at this time, then he decided to leave Switzerland and to migrate to Kosovo. So he explains it in the interview that the reason why he was migrating to Kosovo, that his family can take care about the child. So he don't have to afford childcare in Kosovo because they are moving, the whole family then will live there. His sisters did stay in Switzerland. So at this time he moved then to Kosovo, and he could, it was very interesting because without any qualification, without having any working experience in Switzerland, in Kosovo, he was like using the symbolic capital to say, you were working in Switzerland, you're coming from Switzerland, you are education in Switzerland, and he got directly a job as manager. So without having nothing. So he has like, this was very interesting that he could use like this symbolic capital of having grown up in Switzerland, and then he had a very good job. And in Kosovo the unemployment rate is very, very high. So he had really, really lucky to have this great job. So then in Kosovo, he's living in Kosovo, and he has his family there, and for him everything is great. So what we can see from his case, that social actors are comparing their placement within social stratifications across borders, and hierarchical assignments are taking place in a multi-local manner. So he could use his experience from Switzerland there for upward social mobility, but on the same time it didn't work differently around, because in Switzerland he was really having nothing. So social inequalities take place in a cross-border and multi-local framework. And that makes it interesting. Also, this biographical approach is enabling us to consider different localizations, different places, and to link the personal experience with the structure, the structure of a society. So these are in general my results, like the differences of life trajectories of the members of the same family I was investigating, and the relevance we could see that of ethnicized, gendered, and class-related narratives for their strategies. So all of them were experiencing different kind of placements in society. And by they will develop all different strategies to deal with the intersection of these unequal social relations. And this very interesting point of different positionality in the transnational field. So migrants are really, they know about different possibilities, and they know about possibilities of upward and downward mobility, but sometimes in a transnational comparison, it's still for them a winning. So, and of course, other reasons are already very relevant that we can find out when we take the time to listen to their stories. Yes, so these are my conclusions, like the relevance of the context-specific and time-related social cultural boundary processes, like social inequalities, and to take the relevant context into consideration as entangled history that also are between different histories that are very important, and the biographical approach like as one possibility to reconstruct the individual strategies to deal with this kind of social inequalities.